They told us war makes men out of boys, but nobody told us what it takes away, or how the silence afterward can be louder than the gunfire. The first time I saw Private William Carter, he was standing in the mess hall line with a tray in his hands, wearing that half-smile of his, like he knew something the rest of us didn't. It was Fort Benning, Georgia, late summer of 1967, and we were all just kids pretending to be soldiers. The draft had scooped us up from different corners of the country, farm boys from Iowa, factory workers from Detroit, college dropouts from California, and dumped us into a world of shaved heads, stiff uniforms, and shouted orders. Carter was different, not in the loud, look-at-me way some guys were. He was quiet, but not shy, calm in a way that didn't make sense for someone who'd just been told he was going to Vietnam. Most of us carried that nervous energy in our bodies, a kind of restlessness that kept us awake at night. But Carter, he just moved at his own pace, like he'd already made peace with something we couldn't name. I got to know him better during marksmanship training. We ended up sharing a firing lane at the range, and I noticed the way he held his rifle, steady, almost gentle, like he respected it. When the sergeant barked orders, Carter didn't flinch. When his shots hit center mass, he didn't grin or nod or look for approval. He just adjusted his stance and fired again. "You been hunting or something?" I asked him once after another perfect round. He gave me that half-smile. "My old man taught me to shoot tin cans when I was 8. Guess it stuck." That was Carter, never giving more than he had to, but always giving enough to make you want to hear more. By the time we shipped out, he'd become the guy everyone liked having around. Not the loudest, not the funniest, but dependable. In the chaos of war, dependability is gold. Vietnam didn't hit me all at once. It crept in. The humidity that soaked your uniform before breakfast, the smell of wet earth and diesel, the constant buzzing of insects in your ears. But the first time we took fire, I felt it like a hammer to the chest. One moment we were walking through tall grass, the next there was gunfire cracking through the air and men hitting the ground. I remember Carter's voice, calm and even, telling me to keep low, to crawl towards the tree line. His tone didn't match the chaos, and that's what kept me moving. We made it out of that ambush with 2 wounded and 1 dead. Carter was the one who carried the body back. Private Lane, 19 years old, from Ohio. I saw Carter wrap Lane in a poncho and sling him over his shoulder like it was nothing. But I also saw the way his jaw tightened, the way he stared at the ground on the long walk back. That night, we sat on our packs, sharing a cigarette in the damp darkness. Nobody talked about what happened. You learn quickly in war, if you don't speak it, maybe it won't stick. But I knew it stuck to Carter. I could see it in his eyes. Weeks bled into months. Patrol after patrol, ambush after ambush. The jungle had a way of eating time, swallowing days whole, until you weren't sure if it was Tuesday or Friday, or what month it even was. The only thing that anchored us was the guys around us. One day, word came down that we'd be sweeping a small village suspected of harboring Viet Cong. The intel was shaky. Hell, all the intel was shaky, but orders were orders. We moved in at dawn, the fog still clinging to the rice paddies. Women pulled children inside their huts as we approached. Men stood in doorways, watching with flat eyes. I kept glancing at Carter. He had that same steady walk, but his hands were tighter on his rifle. You could tell he hated this part. The searching, the questioning, the feeling that we were walking into someone else's life and tearing it apart. Halfway through the sweep, a shot rang out from somewhere in the village. It wasn't aimed at us, just a single crack in the air. The squad froze. Our lieutenant barked orders, and we fanned out to find the source. That's when Carter spotted a teenage boy running behind one of the huts, something shiny in his hand. Before I could react, Carter was already moving, fast but controlled. He didn't raise his rifle, didn't shout. He just closed the distance and tackled the kid into the dirt. When he stood up, he was holding a metal spoon. A spoon. The lieutenant came storming over, demanding to know what happened. Carter just handed him the spoon and said, "False alarm." The lieutenant muttered something about wasting time and walked off. That night, Carter didn't talk much. He sat by the fire, staring into the flames like they had answers. I realized then that he wasn't just trying to survive this war. He was trying to keep something human alive in it. It was near the end of our tour when everything changed. We were on patrol near the Cambodian border, moving through thick jungle when we hit the kind of ambush you read about in history books. Gunfire from all sides, explosions shaking the ground. I hit the dirt and tried to return fire, but it was chaos. Pure chaos. Through the smoke, I saw Carter about 10 yards ahead, dragging Sergeant Morales, who'd taken a hit to the leg. Bullets chewed the ground around them, but Carter didn't stop. He got Morales to cover, then turned back toward the fight. That's when I heard the sound, a deep, sharp crack that wasn't like the others. Carter staggered. I don't remember moving, but suddenly I was there, pulling him behind a fallen tree. He'd taken a round to the chest, just under the collarbone. Blood soaked his fatigues, and his breathing was ragged. "They told us war makes men out of boys," he whispered, a ghost of that half-smile on his lips. "But nobody told us what it takes away." I pressed my hands against the wound, shouting for a medic, but the jungle swallowed my voice. Carter's eyes stayed on mine until they didn't anymore. They shipped his body home under a flag, just like they do for all the fallen. At the ceremony, his mother clutched that folded triangle like it was the only thing keeping her upright. I wanted to tell her about the spoon, about how her son saved a boy who might have been the enemy, about how he carried more weight than any one man should. But the words never came. Even now, all these years later, when I see the flag, I don't just see a symbol. I see Carter's steady hands, his quiet courage, and the moment he chose to be human when it would have been easier to be a soldier. Because in war, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is not pull the trigger. The envelope sat on the kitchen table like it didn't belong there. It was thin, almost weightless, but my hands shook as I reached for it. The return address was from the U.S. Army, Fort Benning, Georgia. My breath caught. "Don't open it yet," Sarah said softly from the doorway, her eyes red from crying. "Just sit with me first." But I couldn't wait. My fingers tore the paper, and the words spilled out in black ink that burned into my mind. "We regret to inform you." The world narrowed. The sound of the refrigerator humming was suddenly louder than her sobs. My son, my only boy, was gone. Killed in action in a country most Americans couldn't find on a map. I stumbled into the living room, the floorboards creaking under my weight, and sat in his chair. His football cap still hung on the armrest, tilted just the way he left it. I held it in my hands and tried to smell him in the fabric, but the scent was already fading. War had taken a lot from this town over the years, but this was different. This was mine. And as I sat there, numb and silent, I realized something I'd never dared to admit out loud. Maybe we were never meant to survive these wars, not the ones over there, and not the ones we fight in our hearts when the letters come home. The funeral was quiet. Only the wind whispered through the old oaks lining the cemetery. Sarah held my hand tightly, both of us staring at the folded flag being placed into her arms. The weight of it felt heavier than anything I had ever carried in the jungles of Vietnam. I thought of Private Carter, how steady he had been, how brave, and how much life he had carried even when the world demanded only fear and violence. I thought of the letters he never sent, the smiles he shared, and the sacrifices no one could measure. War doesn't just end when the guns fall silent. It lingers in the empty chairs, in the letters we clutch, in the faces of those we love who are never quite the same again. I left the cemetery that day with a heart heavier than the flag, but also with a quiet understanding. Surviving is not just about making it through the firefight. It's about carrying the memory of those who didn't, honoring them in the way we live our lives afterward. And somewhere in that silence, I finally heard it. Not the echoes of gunfire, but the echoes of humanity, reminding me what we fight to protect.